Well, we've got some news coming out today. It seems unconfirmed as of yet, but there's not a whole lot. I'm not seeing a whole lot of pushback against it. And I want to get on the record about this before it happens, just so that my stance is clear and I can come back to this later on when it turns out that I'm right, if this ends up happening. Apparently, President Trump yesterday met with Sidney Powell, the Kraken lawyer woman, who has been going on and on about Dominion and Hugo Chavez and the Cubans hacking our election, and how this is going to expose this big fraud, and how Trump really won California and all this stuff. And he's thinking of making her, appointing her a special counsel to investigate election fraud. Now, if he did this, from what I understand, the way the special counsel statute works, or an independent counsel, I can't remember, but there's some statute that would allow him to appoint this, so that theoretically she wouldn't be able to be fired by Joe Biden. I think that's what they're trying to do here, because of course, if there was a way that she could be fired, that wouldn't, there would be no point in appointing her. But essentially, what Trump is considering here is giving Joe Biden his own Bob Mueller, which I can kind of see that from a purely from a revenge standpoint. It makes sense, giving the Democrats a taste of their own medicine. But as someone who thinks that it's best to be on the side of the truth, I think this is a terrible idea. I think that this is a great way for the president to discredit himself and his cause by appointing a clown like Sidney Powell to such a position. Now, if you wanted a serious investigation into voter fraud, that'd be one thing. But Sidney Powell is not going to do that. Sidney Powell is, if she would be appointed to this position, would be going down all sorts of rabbit holes and would essentially be, she would be playing the role of Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller, he spent all these years, issued all these subpoenas, did all this stuff. He went on his witch hunt, and it was a witch hunt, and guess what? He found nothing. Sidney Powell, if she also decides to go on a witch hunt about Dominion and all this stuff, she's probably not going to find much. If you want to look for fraud in this election, look for mail-in ballots, look for dead people voting, look for people registering with false addresses. You look at all this kind of more conventional voter fraud. Don't waste time on the electronic stuff. It's hard to prove, and in most jurisdictions, probably didn't have an effect. And the only reason I say this, with some certainty, is because of the hand recount in Georgia. In Georgia, they did a hand recount, and it showed that it didn't change things a whole hell of a lot. It did change a few thousand votes because there were votes that were found or whatever that weren't counted or something. But it did not show that there was some kind of algorithmic distortion in the way that the votes were being counted. And so if they weren't doing that in Georgia, they probably weren't doing it in too many other places. And with that said, that would also tell us, what happened in Georgia was probably more related to mail-in ballots, probably related to drop boxes. That's where you're going to end up finding fraud. And I would say that, it would be best to look to use that as a baseline and look for that throughout the rest of the country. But from the beginning, this has never been anything that interested Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell was much more interested in the in finding some sort of neat and tidy broad conspiracy between a bunch of foreign powers that ends up sounding a whole hell of a lot like Russiagate. And so by appointing Powell to be a special prosecutor, or special counsel, or independent counsel, whatever the term is, to carry out her investigation while Biden is president, she will be feeding a Russiagate narrative to, discredit Biden, which is a good thing, but she won't be discrediting him based on the truth. It'll be discrediting him based on nonsense. And I just think that that's a dangerous game to play, because if you actually do have anyone who honestly tries to look at this stuff, they're going to call you out for your nonsense. Now, is it going to energize partisans? Yes. The Russiagate thing was incredibly effective at energizing, your sort of liberals, not really your leftists. Your good leftists, Matt Taibbi, Jimmy Dore, all those types. They all called out the Russiagate stuff as nonsense, as they should have. And, I assume they will do the exact same thing if we have the same situation going on with the right. Now, the other problem by having someone like Sidney Powell who's going to pursue a lot of nonsense in an investigation rather than, the good stuff, is that the nonsensical Dominion stuff is going to completely distract from all of the very legitimate and easy to prove stuff. There might be something going on with the Dominion stuff, but again, if all the machines are wiped and stuff and they don't seize them in time, or the ones that they do seize, haven't been wiped yet, or that there was nothing wrong with them, they're going to say, oh, well, the ones that were wiped were the ones that had the incriminating evidence, blah, blah, blah. It'll be a totally unfalsifiable hypothesis. None of that has good optics as far as I'm concerned. You don't need to do all that. You can go after the low-hanging fruit. You can go after the stuff that people absolutely cannot deny. Because when you have so much great evidence and so many irregularities that are easy to wrap your head around, why go for the esoteric stuff like this? The only thing that you will serve to do is to discredit the election fraud narrative in minds of free-thinking and reasonable people, because they won't want to be a part of an obviously nuts conspiracy theory. If you're going to try and investigate and expose election fraud, do it in a way that not only the right can get on board with it, but also, the very few people in this country who, are still open-minded, and make it so, make the evidence so clear that the only way that anyone could deny it is if they are just a nakedly partisan Democrat. Now, with all that said, if the person to do that, in my opinion, is not Sidney Powell, who is it? Oh, well, I think this should come as no surprise to people who've been following this channel, but I would say Robert Barnes, who is an actual election lawyer, unlike Sidney Powell, who has never practiced election law. Robert Barnes is someone who I was following in the lead-up to this election. He was essentially forecasting, hey, if there's going to be fraud in this election, here's how they're going to do it. Him and Rich Barris of People's Pundit. Both of them are guys who have worked in elections for a long time. They know how the game is played, and they forecasted a lot, or I should say they just they explained ahead of time how the fraud was going to work, and then once it started playing out, it was very easy for someone like me to follow along. They made a very reasonable case, and so if you want somebody to investigate election fraud, they specifically Barnes, because Barnes is the lawyer, although Barris probably could help out with the investigation too, as I'm sure lots of other people could. I'm sure that there are plenty of lawyers who, Barnes and them and all that, their group, they would know who to get on the team. But Sidney Powell would not be one of those people. But you need someone who knows how the game is played, so that they know where to look, to find where the bodies are buried. This is an example to me of one of Trump's real weaknesses, and it's that he's heavily prone to flattery, and I don't think, this might upset some of his supporters, but I don't think he's the smartest guy in the world. He has good instincts. That's about it. His instincts are, what the wizards of smart are telling me is wrong. That's a very good instinct because, probably 95% of the time you're going to be right, and that the wizards of smart are wrong. But in this case, even though the wizards of smart are saying that, Sidney Powell's terrible, don't appoint Sidney Powell, she's not, they're still not right about that, because the wizards of smart say there's no election fraud, there's no problems with the election, don't look into anything. That's why they're saying don't appoint Sidney Powell. But I'm saying that, hey, as someone who agrees with you, Mr. President, that we need to look into this election fraud, please, for the love of God, do not appoint this woman. Now, with all that said, if he does appoint Sidney Powell, and we do end up with a Mueller investigation 2.0, but, against the Democrats rather than against Trump, it is going to have its political utility. Don't get me wrong. It's going to energize the right just like the left was energized by Bob Mueller. You will see people dressing up their daughters like Sidney Powell for Halloween in the same way that people dressed up their sons like Bob Mueller for Halloween. My God, that was cringy. I hated every second of it. The Mueller time memes. Oh my, ugh. I'm not looking forward to that if we have that again with the boomer cons. But the utility of it will be to delegitimize our electoral system, which has already been heavily delegitimized, as far as the left is concerned, because they feel like that our election system was entirely compromised by Russia when they lost. And if the right feels like the election system, was completely compromised by Cuba and Venezuela when they lost, hey, then you have two sides of the aisle, neither of which believes in our election system, which means that it's no longer an effective way of settling our political disputes. Elections are no longer a way for us to settle political differences, and if that's the case, we have to search for a new method, preferably peaceful disassociation. So, in conclusion, I guess, my take is that the appointment of Sidney Powell to be some kind of special counsel to investigate election fraud would not be an unmitigated disaster. It would just be suboptimal. I believe that if you're going to have something like this, I would hope that it be rooted entirely in the truth. But from a purely Machiavellian standpoint, there's not a huge downside in the final result when it comes to appointing Sidney Powell versus, say, a Robert Barnes. Both of them will accomplish similar goals, and that is delegitimizing the 2020 election, at least in the eyes of half the country. I just, from an intellectual standpoint, I like to do that. I like to make my points with the truth rather than propaganda. I'm someone who likes to be right. I don't like to be wrong. Being wrong is one of the worst feelings in the world to me. And if we do get a Sidney Powell as, the special counsel investigating election fraud, and the Biden administration doesn't find a way to fire her immediately, and we do end up with a Bob Mueller kind of investigation over the next 4 years, and she comes out with some nonsensical stuff, I'm gonna tear her apart for it, because it will, in my opinion, be a huge wasted opportunity. Where real election fraud could have been exposed. So I guess that's all I have to say on that topic. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.